In the early 2000s, I'd say when I was in about second or third grade, at my elementary school, there were basically two factions. There were the Yu-Gi-Oh kids and the Pokemon kids. Now, at the time, I would say Yu-Gi-Oh was probably a little more popular at my school than Pokemon. At least more kids were playing the game, and I was one of those kids, and it was something I always enjoyed. Everyone would come to school with their starter decks that they got from the store and just sort of play on the playground or play at the lunch table, and it was always a really fun time. And one thing we would do is maybe if we had some allowance money or we begged our parents enough, we would buy booster packs from our local store, whether it be like a Walmart or a Target, and see what kind of cards we can get from that booster pack to improve our decks. And then the next day at school, we would come in with a deck with different cards and hopefully better cards in them and see how it went. And as structure decks and other starter decks came out, we learned new strategies and got new cards for our decks. And it was always just a very pure and fun and organic way to play the game with our friends. Now fast forward to about high school is when I kind of dabbled into Magic the Gathering a little bit. I did some drafts with people, but that's about it. I learned how to play Pokemon, the trading card game too, but I was always really big on Yu-Gi-Oh! And I stopped for a handful of years for different reasons. But once the pandemic hit, just like a lot of people, I actually got back into Yu-Gi-Oh! And not just collecting the cards, but relearning basically how to play the game, especially in its modern form. And I'm not gonna lie, there were some things as a returning player that I didn't really know about and that surprised me. And it didn't necessarily just have to do with the game itself, it had to do with different things surrounding the game. And more people are coming to realize that as they get into trading card games for the first time, or if they're returning players to whichever game they are returning to. And so in this video, we're going to talk about the truth about trading card games. What's up everybody, welcome to InkSpot Games, and today we're going to be talking about TCGs kind of in a general sense. I know that this channel has been dedicated to Lorcana, but I think I'm going to use this to sort of take advantage of the fact that a lot of Lorcana players are new to TCGs or are returning to TCGs, and hopefully this will kind of help them navigate through that. But this video can also apply to anyone playing any game, really, whether it be whatever you choose. This video can apply to you if you're kind of new or returning, and hopefully this will help you out. But before we get into the discussion, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you like this content. We're approaching 200 subscribers, and hopefully I would love to exceed that and really grow this channel. So if you enjoy what you see, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Now, let's get into the discussion. So, in trading card games, there's really kind of, at least right now, the big three. And if you know anything about trading card games, you know what they are. But the big three, the kind of the top tier trading card games, and they have been for decades now, are Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, and Yu-Gi-Oh! In fact, if you were to kind of put those three into a pyramid or triangle, Magic the Gathering would be at the top, and then there would be the other two. But in the sense, basically it's those three that have kind of ruled the top echelon of trading card games, and they haven't been dethroned by anything. And there have been a lot of trading card games that have come and gone. Kind of in a tier under them, there's a ton of other ones. Flesh and Blood, Card Fight Vanguard, Lorcana right now, which is newer and trying to stake its claim as a legitimate trading card game. There's also different games coming out like Star Wars Unlimited. There's online games, digital only games like Hearthstone or Runeterra. And so there's a lot of different card games in the mix here, but basically you have those top three. That's just kind of like a little bit of like background to kind of what the pecking order is when it comes to trading card games. And for a lot of people, they've heard of them or have tried them out before, or just getting into them and are playing them at a pretty casual level, not really getting too competitive. But the second people start to get a little more competitive, or maybe start going to locals or whatever, with really any of these games, really, not even just the big three, they kind of get hit with a tough dose of reality about what it's like to really be in this kind of lifestyle trading card game scene, and how committed you need to be, especially with games like Yu-Gi-Oh, which aren't really that accessible to new players. Now, Yu-Gi-Oh was kind of like my main game, essentially, so I have a pretty good handle on it, but for someone who's never played it before, it can be kind of difficult. Magic and Pokemon are pretty easy to get into, but from that point of view, sometimes just getting into some of these games might not be the easiest thing. So there are a lot of different factors going into kind of the truth or reality of TCGs in general, but I'm kind of going to break it down with three different things, three different categories that we're going to talk about here. And if you are new or returning and don't really know these things, then I would kind of hope that this helps you navigate that, and that helps you kind of understand what you're getting into so that you're not blindsided by certain things. And also, this isn't kind of an attempt to dissuade anyone from playing trading card games. Like, yeah, for any game, really, there are certain realities that you have to face, even with board games or video games. You know, the purpose of this video isn't to push people away from playing trading card games, but it's to kind of give them a guide to help them navigate through the things that you're not always told or you don't know going in. So the first thing I kind of want to talk about here when it comes to trading card games is the overall community. Now, one reality of trading card games, unless you're only playing online, whether it be an online only game like Hearthstone or online clients like Pixelborn or Dueling Book or Magic Arena, trading card games are a social thing. You are sitting in front of a physical person across from you on the table, holding cardboard in your hands. Now, that's great, and this sense of community and, you know, maybe making friends and all that is a really good thing, but as we know, people are not necessarily perfect, and I'm sure in any trading card game you get into, you will find your sort of, I want to say, toxic players for multiple different reasons. Now, before I get into it, I want to give like a little disclaimer. I'm not trying to kind of paint a broad picture that, oh, all trading card game players are toxic or all communities are just the worst and you can never have fun in them because of the people in it. That's not true at all. In fact, there's a lot of people who are really trying to make it a more welcoming space for all different ages, genders, and demographics and all of that, and that's a great thing. In fact, I went to a Lorcana tournament a couple weeks ago, and there were people sort of helping kids learn the game, basically sacrificing what essentially will have been a free win. There is plenty of that to go around, but I'm not going to beat around the bush here. Trading card game communities can be very toxic, whether it be on the internet or in real life in general. People are very, very competitive, and there's nothing wrong with being competitive, but sometimes people can take it too far. In any trading card game, there's usually a divide between sort of the super competitive players or the super casual players, and they never really seem to mix well. And if you're going to a big tournament, you're going to see kind of a lot of those people in both groups there, kind of in one place, and sometimes it can create a toxic environment. And I don't even want to get into the internet of all of it, because we all know how ridiculous the internet can be when it comes to toxicity. There's plenty of times, and I've seen it myself, where sometimes you're just playing a friendly game and someone gets super salty or super mad at you because you won or because you got lucky and drew the exact card you needed. And for someone who is new coming into a TCG, who is not used to that and has never really been around that from a face-to-face perspective, then that can be very discouraging, and that could be something that they say, you know what, I don't want to have to deal with that. Like, at least with video games, if you're like talking with someone online in a chat, then it's like you're not really face-to-face with them, but in a card game, you're with that person who might be giving you a hard time. And just, there are just people in trading card communities, I know Yu-Gi-Oh has a really hard time with this, who aren't very good at being polite or just social in general, and that can be very discouraging. And again, I don't want to sit here and say that, just the majority of people in card games are just awful and they just want you to have a bad time and just avoid them at all costs. That's not what I'm saying at all. All right, what I'm saying is I don't want you to be surprised when you run into people like that, people who don't make the game pleasant for other players around them, and like I said, are just being toxic or rude. And so it's one of those things where I don't like talking about, because I try to be as, just basic decency or polite as I can when at a tournament, even if I am annoyed that maybe something didn't go my way. Like, I at least try my best to not be that guy. So I just hope that if you're going into a game, just remember, I know, like, maybe you put a lot of time, effort, and money into it, but at the end of the day, you're playing a game with someone else, and that person you're playing a game with is just a person too, another human being. So I hate like having to sort of talk about this, but I don't want to just ignore the fact that like toxicity in card games, and just like a lot of other hobbies or competitive things, can be a problem, and I don't want anyone to be sort of surprised by that. The next thing I want to talk about here when it comes to trading card games is the idea that in most scenarios, and I haven't played every single trading card game that ever exists, so maybe this doesn't apply to everything, but to a lot of games, a lot of times, all cards, all decks aren't created equal. There is a level of being fortunate enough to have certain things in order to have the best deck or whatever. And a lot of times that is tied to money or luck, things like that. One thing you can compare it to, again, for those who were more into video games, if you remember back in the day with like Battlefront 2, the Star Wars game, like it was very much pay to play, and trading card games can be like that as well. Like, I think if I remember in Battlefield 2, like if you had sort of the DLC characters that you had to pay with that you couldn't earn any other way, you had an advantage regardless of what your skill was. Trading card games can be very similar. A lot of times there can be a pay to win sort of model that gives people the edge. Now that's not to say that skill isn't involved here. Obviously, skill is such an important aspect of really any competitive thing, any competitive game. Like if you had two of the exact same decks going up against each other, a lot of times the player who's the more skillful and makes the best decisions will end up winning. Sure, there's luck involved, but I would say more times than not, skill plays a much bigger factor. But that being said, one thing that happens in trading card games is that most of the time, the best cards are harder to get. In Yu-Gi-Oh, a lot of times they'll short print cards, which makes them more difficult to get, or they'll make them really high rarity, sort of the best cards really high rarity, so that they end up selling more products, so people try to chase those cards, hence the name chase cards. And like, to a certain point, I don't really blame like trading card game manufacturers for doing that. Like, it's one really big way to sell product for people to chase after these good cards. But like, a lot of games, unless they reprint things in lower rarities or reprint them in future like reprint sets, can make it very difficult for people to kind of balance the playing field if you don't have that card. It's as simple as this. If you have, insert X card here that is really good and gives you an edge, your deck will be better than the deck that does not have that card. And a lot of times that card is hard to pull from a pack or is very expensive online. Again, maybe in the future they'll get reprinted and they'll be easier to access, but by that time in a lot of card games, cards will get power crept anyway, and sometimes it's not even as good as it was before in its original printing. So one harsh reality of trading card games, at least from a competitive level, if you want to have sort of the most optimized deck, most competitive deck, you're going to have to either shell out a lot of money or get really lucky pulling a bunch of packs, or both, depending on the card. And in a lot of ways, trading card games can be very pay to win. Again, obviously there's skill involved too. Skill does play an important role. If you don't know how to operate a deck and you have the best deck, then most likely you're not going to get very far in tournaments. The players, a lot of times, who have higher skill will get far, but to even have a chance at a competitive level, it has a very big sort of pay to win aspect to it. Even at a casual level, like if there's some cards that will just make your more casual deck better, it's really hard to access those cards. And this is in really any trading card game. I know like some trading card games are more expensive than others, but the fact of the matter is, in most trading card games, a lot of times it's pay to win, but obviously you do still need skill, but the money aspect and luck aspect of it all plays a very big role. The last point I kind of want to make here is something that to this day it just annoys me so much, and you can use so much energy trying to follow this. And again, we're getting into like another kind of financial money territory here, like we did with the last point, is that trading card games have basically a stock market. They have a market where the price of cards or product is in constant fluctuation. Now, some cards, at least when you get to like kind of the lower levels of the market, like pennies, those won't jump all that much, or cards that have been reprinted a lot will go down and it won't be affected all that much. But like, there is a level of following the price of cards, because like you don't want to waste your money. And one thing that can be very frustrating is you buy a meta relevant card or cards for God knows how much money, and next thing you know, that card gets reprinted, or that card gets banned, or if you didn't know about the set rotation, that card got rotated out or whatever. Now you're kind of not happy because you dished out a lot for that card, and now it's basically worthless for one reason or another. Another thing that gets frustrating, and Lorcana is seeing this right now, is something like buyouts or scalpers or whatever, that can increase the price of some cards because a fortunate few are able to just buy it all out and resell it at a higher price. You know, one thing that's really difficult to do, and I guess if you're able to do this, then that just means you're kind of skilled at it, but like taking that risk of if this card is going to be good in the future, I buy it all out now, it'll be more expensive. Good for you for calling that out, but that doesn't make it any more frustrating when trying to make a financial decision and purchase something, right? Like sometimes it can, it can just be very frustrating, and the market can be very frustrating. Now, I'm not going to get into kind of the ins and outs of like distribution and allocation and how all of that can affect the price of product or the price of cards. Like I said, Lorcana is kind of having this problem right now. But there are times where cards just aren't reprinted or aren't reissued and they stay expensive. And sure, that might be good for investors or maybe even collectors, but like from a player standpoint, it can make getting the cards you want more difficult, more frustrating, and following the market can just take a lot of energy and time that you just might not have. And then next thing you know, you just feel behind on everything. Especially if you have a game like Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh, where like they're constantly releasing product. It seems like every handful of weeks almost. It can make it really difficult to follow. And then next thing you know, you're just feeling ripped off because you did pull the trigger on one card, but then something happened where it made the price drop. Now, at the end of the day, that can happen with really any card, and that doesn't mean that like, you should just never buy cards again, or you weren't justified in buying that card, because if you bought it and you used it and you enjoyed it and all that stuff, then at the end of the day, was it a bad purchase? That's more up to you. But if you're looking to get into trading card games, if you're looking to get into TCGs, and being like serious about it, even from a casual level, it's something you'd have to pay attention to. It's sort of the card market, and it can just be very time consuming. So that's all I got for this. Again, I don't want to try to dissuade anyone from getting into trading cards. There's so much fun and community and friendship that can be made doing it, but these are just things you need to be aware of if you are a new or returning player. So I hope this can at least be helpful and it wasn't too negative. Again, if you liked it, make sure you like it, subscribe to the channel, all that fun stuff. And yeah, hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you on the next one. Later.